I don't know about you guys, but whenever Pixar announces that they are making a sequel to a certain movie of theirs, my initial reaction was almost always me saying,
Say what?
immediately following that, then I ask myself, is it really necessary? Most of the time, I actually say no because most original Pixar movies are so good from beginning to end that I couldn't really conceive a continuation of these films. As a result, I always go into viewing these sequel announcements with a hefty dose of skepticism. With the announcement of Coco 2 just a few days ago, my initial reaction is pretty much the same. Coco is a film that I really loved, and it's a movie that deserves its own dedicated video. But as great as it was though, the last thing I thought was, man, I wish we get to see a part 2 of this story. Nearly everything about this movie, from its animation, to its characters, to the visual diversity, to its humor, to its morals, and much more, all of it was neatly wrapped up in one of the best endings of any Pixar film in my opinion. What made this ending so good is just how it neatly concluded the arcs of most of the characters. Miguel of course learned about the importance of his family heritage while being able to live out his passion for music. Hector was able to stay alive in the land of the dead. Imelda forgave Hector after learning the truth of his disappearance. Ernesto de la Cruz got what he deserved for literally poisoning Hector to an early grave. Then there's Coco, who was able to overcome her dementia just long enough to pass on the memory of her father so they can reunite in the land of the dead when she passed. Clearly, these characters have gotten very conclusive, well-deserved endings. So what possible story could Pixar cook up for the sequel? Well, to see where Pixar can go for Coco 2, we first have to look at Pixar's most recent sequel, Inside Out 2. Yep, it's not a Marngel Pixar video without referencing this movie. But I bring up this film because prior to when it was released, I also expressed skepticism towards it for largely the same reasons I gave for Coco. The original Inside Out also had a very conclusive ending where most of the characters learned the right lessons, and left not much room to further develop these characters. But against all odds, Pixar was able to find a new storyline for Riley and the emotions in her mind, and we ended up getting one of the best Pixar movies in years. It was surprising for me at least to see Pixar pull this off, but looking back in hindsight, it was actually pretty simple for them to expand the Inside Out world. They actually laid the groundwork for a sequel by teasing Riley's puberty. Also, adding new characters like Anxiety allowed further development of the other major characters like Anger, Disgust, and Fear, which gave the writers more material to build a story. In addition, Riley's mind has a lot of room for expansion, especially considering that Pixar has the entire subject of psychology to work with when figuring out what kinds of settings, conflicts, themes, and references to throw into the sequel. These simple building blocks were all that Pixar needed to continue a story that had a very conclusive ending. When you look at Coco on paper, there doesn't seem to be much to work with, and to be clear, there is less to work with compared to Inside Out. But if you look deeper into the original film, you'd notice there are actually some underdeveloped aspects of its story that could potentially be the basis for the sequel. The main building block I can see the writers of the sequel use is the Rivera family in the land of the living. You see, while we did get a very cohesive story of Miguel, Hector, and the Rivera family members in the land of the dead, the rest of Miguel's family was missing for most of the film. They got very little screen time, and as a result, they were never really developed as more than just a running joke on how the family's hatred towards music has been passed down through generations. This is arguably one of the main faults of the original movie, and the conclusion of their arcs suffered because of it. However, a sequel to Coco would allow these characters to get the development they need. I can see a storyline where Miguel has to go back to the land of the dead like in the first film, but this time he brings the rest of his family with him on his adventure. It's kind of similar to how Inside Out 2 and Toy Story 2 and 3 worked when you think about it. In both franchises, their adventures are actually pretty similar to their original counterparts, but the main difference is that the rest of the supporting characters joined in the adventure with the main cast. Of course, the next question would be what potential problem Miguel has to solve that warrants him and his family to travel to the land of the dead. I'll admit, this is a much harder question to solve. It's not as clear-cut compared to the other sequels. If we apply this logic of expanding the journey to involve more of the supporting cast, then the conflict would also need to be expanded. This conflict could take in a form in a completely different way, but I predict that Miguel has to save not only Hector or Coco from the final death, but also the entire Rivera family or even the whole land of the dead. Maybe after a certain amount of time, the culture in Mexico has shifted to where newer generations don't seem to care much about their ancestors like previous generations. Now, admittedly, I don't know if that's actually a phenomenon going on in Mexico right now, but it is definitely an interesting scenario. And this results in the Land of the Dead itself suffering. To make this kind of conflict work, the sequel may adopt a time skip where Miguel is a fully grown adult with his own family, and he would have the responsibility of teaching the importance of Dia de los Muertos to the next generation. There could also be the possibility of Miguel discovering yet another lost family member whose memory was about to fade. There's also the possibility of Miguel not being the main protagonist for the sequel. Maybe the movie would shine a spotlight on another member of the Rivera family. I mean, as long as the movie is related to Coco, the actual family member, then the story could be about anyone really. Although, that right there is pretty much the main problem with making a sequel to Coco. For a sequel to work, there has to be a story left to tell for the title character. And unfortunately, there's just not much to work with. All of the ideas I've thrown so far involve creating a whole new problem for Coco that has not been teased as a possibility in the first movie. This does mean the writers of the sequel could ruin the perception of the first movie, which is something that Pixar has been a little bit hit or miss with. Having the title be focused on a specific character that doesn't really have that big of an arc to start is a major limitation that makes a sequel rather difficult to justify, let alone make. Now, putting my skepticism aside though, I will admit that Pixar has miraculously found ways of making most of their sequels feel like they deserve to exist. They may not always be as good as the original films, in fact most of the time they aren't, but their sequels are still great films. After all, Pixar is a company run by people who claim to believe they will only make a sequel to a movie if they believe there is more to tell with the characters and the world they created. With Coco and the Land of the Dead, there is some room for further world building, especially considering that Mexican culture is a deep mine of ideas. So while I and a lot of us are having mixed feelings about this film, it's good to know that there's still quite a lot of time for the people at Pixar to figure things out. Keep in mind, we have around 4 years until this movie is expected to come out, and there's not even a guarantee it will even come out in 2029, considering that Pixar actually edited their tweet to remove that detail. Hell, there could also be a chance they may just ditch the project entirely, like what they did with a certain Pixar film in the past. As of right now, there's just not much we can say is certain. Although, what is certain is that Disney's corporate class have a heavy hand in pressuring Pixar to make this work, like a lot of the sequels coming out of both studios, but that is a topic for another day. For now though, if you have anything to say about Pixar's recent announcement, write all of your thoughts down in the comments below, and please give this video a like, and subscribe for more content like this. With all that said, thank you all for watching this video. I hope you all have a great day. See you in the next one.